Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. It's a Stashin with Stephanie Day, so we have a brand new fat quarter friendly pattern that's been inspired by this month's Stashin with Stephanie bundle. That is Belle Epoque from FreeSpirit Fabrics. I really love this collection. You can see it behind me. It's really bright and fun, and it really is going to allow us to have kind of a riot of color around the quilt, which is a fabulous thing to work on, especially when it's a dreary winter. As I'm filming this, like the first storm of the season is scheduled to come down on us, and we ship all of our staffing around so that we could get everything out a day early for you guys before the storm hit. So this month's pattern, Scatter, is going to be based around the half square triangle. We're making rather large half square triangles, so while there are a lot of them to make, they're not itty bitty, so that they do go kind of fast. I did have some help with this one, both in tag teaming the trimming down, and even my husband helped with pressing the blocks open, but we're still going to get this quilt done from start to finish in about a week. So, and that's with also preparing for Christmas and lots of other things going on in life and work. And so I feel like that's pretty good, even with all the half square triangles. So it's a super fun quilt to make. I'm going to show you how I make 2 at a time half square triangles so that they are the perfect size every single time and the points land exactly where they're supposed to. If you want to learn more about this, we do have a triangle masterclass that you can take that goes not only over the half square triangle, but also quarter square triangles, or sometimes they are called hourglass units, double pinwheels, flying geese, and miter borders, and all the things. And those videos are free to take. We do have a pattern that is available if you get a kit. That pattern is free. So lots of really cool things to check out and master those triangles in the new year. But you can always watch a super in-depth video that's just about half square triangles, but we will cover everything in today's video as well. All right, so before we get into it, we are going to talk about Stashin with Stephanie, and then we're going to take a peek at this month's fabric. So go ahead and fast forward if you're a member of the club and you already have your fabric in hand and are ready to get going making this. So Stashin with Stephanie is a subscription club that we run here at Quilt Addicts Anonymous. If you join, you get immediate access to all those patterns that are as PDFs on our website, and they are free once you're a member. You also get a discount, an exclusive discount on my fat quarter friendly books. That's Fat Quarter Workshop, which is a bestseller on Amazon, and Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts, and I will sign them before they ship out to you. So that's a really fun. And also, you're going to get about a 20% discount on your fabric bundle every month. We're going to send you 10 fat quarters, and that's not the complete collection, but that's something to add to your stash or be able to make something with. And then also you get an exclusive 20% off discount on any additional fabric you would like to get. So for example, our members got a 10-piece bundle, and then we also put together what we call a finishing kit, which includes an additional 5 fat quarters, binding, and background fabric. So that way they're able to combine the two to get in this month an entire twin size kit. Usually they're lap sized, but this month it's a little bit bigger. So it's really fun. It's a great club to be a part of. If you're trying to control your quilting budget but still be able to bring in new fabrics regularly, this is a great club to join. We send out exclusively modern fabric, and if you kind of want to get a peek of what we've done in the past, we have a lot of our previous bundles on there, so you can take a peek and see if it's to your style. And if not, then you can just get the fabrics when you see them and you like them and you want to get a kit, or check out the patterns individually, but they won't be free if you don't join. You also get first dibs on that extra fabric, and we do sell out of some of the fabrics, especially some of the really fun prints. And so it's just a good club to be a part of, get some extra goodies, and save throughout the year. So you can really bust that stash with all those free patterns. So that is Stashin with Stephanie. If you join by December 31st, your first bundle will ship around the 22nd of January. If you do not join until January 1st or later, then you're going to be waiting until February 22nd for that first ship date. And so we know how many bundles to prepare. We're able to send them all out at the same time, and everyone gets that email at the same time, so everyone gets the same chance to get additional fabric, because it does go kind of quick sometimes. So that's the fun stuff for Stashin with Stephanie. Great way to work on a sew on a budget this next year. All right, let's take a peek at the fabric, and then we're going to get into the tutorial. All All right, so this month we are featuring Belle Epoque by Stacy Peterson for FreeSpirit Fabrics. This is a really pretty line, and I really love the color combos in this one. And it starts with this really pretty flower, and it's a small scale flower with some like country manners in the background. It's super fun and adorable. This one has that classic Victorian silhouette in the background, and we got big pluming hats in there, and that's in a nice purple tone. And then we have lots of flowers, and the flowers are in colors that we're going to see throughout the rest of the collection. So it's really pretty, really gorgeous, and this looks really fun when we put it together for the block. This one is a really gorgeous. It looks like weeping willows in the way that this print is designed. There are sort of trees in the background with big winding branches. There's a bunch of little cats, the silhouette of them in there, and it's the night sky because we have little stars around. But these little dots hanging down in that beautiful purple pink just look like weeping willow branches, and this is a really gorgeous print. So we always include 15 fabrics in our bundle and kit. And sometimes the collection isn't quite large enough, so we add what's called a basic in. This is Seeds by Corey Dantini, also for FreeSpirit Fabrics, and the blue really works very well with the blue that we see within the rest of the collection. I really love this floral print. To me, it looks a little bit, I can't tell if it's a rose or a pansy or maybe a bunch of different flowers, because this looks like a dahlia to me, or maybe a mom. They're just really gorgeous, really pretty, and I love the mixture of the pinks and oranges juxtaposed with those cool prints or cool colors of the purple and teal and blue. It just is really gorgeous, and I love this print. Here we have our Victorian silhouettes again. This time they're on a much smaller scale, and our silhouettes are in this really pretty magenta, and we have more of a teal and green and blue background. It's really gorgeous. This one is really pretty too. It can make a really fun border print if you wanted to increase the size of the quilt. And I really love these tendrils. I just think that they're so pretty, and it has all the colors of the collection in it, which makes it really fun to look at. Also, let me call your attention to this beautiful selvage here. It's all butterflies in all the colors. So if you're a selvage saver, this is a really good one to grab. This one mimics those swirls that we saw in the background and has little bouquets in the center. It's gorgeous, and there's not that much of these like pop colors, and so they're really going to stand out when you have them mixed in with all of these deeper blues. This one is really fun. It looks like lace work, and inside of it are the flowers coming out of teacups. It's so beautiful, and this is like my favorite color of all time, so I think it's fabulous. This one is really gorgeous as well and looks great in a block. We have these really kind of medium scale butterflies, and they have all the colors in here. To me, these are very Tula-esque. We don't have hidden images within them, but the coloring of it is really pretty. We do have a little bit of hidden image, I suppose, because their antennae look a little bit like leaves, but this is a really gorgeous print. Here's that Seeds print again by Corey Dantini. This time we have it in a light pink, which is going to coordinate with the colors that are coming next. Here we have that big manor house that we saw at the beginning in our very first print among all the flowers, but this time it's kind of the star of the show. We have a whole bunch of them. There are some fancy gates in there, and of course a lot of flowers, and I really love that they've included that orange and the white. It really is a great pop. And we've got to take our butterfly inspo from somewhere, and it's this print. It's a really nice deep magenta print with little butterflies floating around. They're very small scale, so it does a good job of putting the focus on some of the other busier prints. And they have like little stardust coming after them. It's really pretty. This is the same print that we saw earlier, but the florals are on a much larger scale. This gives me cave vibes here, both in the coloring and all of the florals and the colors that are mixed together. It's just really a fun one. And again, when you mix it together with some of these smaller prints, it just really stands out. And last but not least, I decided to include an orange seed print because orange is a common theme throughout all of the fabrics, and this will kind of help the little bits of orange pop. And since it's only going to be 1 fat quarter's worth, it's just going to kind of draw your eye as long as you want to spread this out when you're laying your quilt blocks out. Make sure they're concentrated all over the quilt rather than all in one corner. That would not look good. But we'll do a video when I'm laying everything out on my bed to decide where everything is going to go. And you can kind of see how I'm going to put it in many different locations so that your eye isn't drawn to any one location. We want it to constantly be moving around. So you want to have a good mix of blue all over and pink all over. And when you have pop colors like this one and the teal and probably the limey green, those you want to make sure that you are really spreading out good throughout the quilt. So that way they draw the colors that we see throughout, like this teal is also here, here, and here, and also here, but you don't want them to all be in one spot. So you can see my process of laying everything out, and it really is a fun process, but I wanna make sure to highlight that as I talk about it. All right, so that is Belle Epoque with a few seats mixed in to help round out the collection and make it work for our purposes here today. And it really is gorgeous. We've got yardage of this, we have some fat quarter bundles, and we're gonna have quilt kits. And if you're a member of the club, you can get a finishing kit, which when you combine with your bundle is enough to create a full twin size kit. So that'll be super fun. All right, we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes and do the tutorial. So the pattern this month is called Scatter, and what inspired me was a vintage tile decoration. And the tile in the original image was curved, but I figured y'all would not want to make a bunch of curved blocks. So we're going to make it in half square triangles instead. And a few of the rows are offset, so it creates a really fun look. And it may look like there's no rhyme or reason to the placement of it, but there is a discernible repeat, and we can actually show an image of that. It's included in the pattern. And if you are making a lap size, there's going to be 2 of these repeats. If you're making a twin, there are 3, and they're just going to be stacked one on top of each other. And if you're making a king, then there's going to be 6, with 3 stacked on one half of the quilt and 3 stacked on the other half of the quilt. It is super fun, super easy to do, and if you're looking to master half square triangles, this is the one to do it with. What I'm going to show you here today is how to make one of the arrow blocks. And this, you can batch it, of course. That's what I did when I did mine. I marked all of my half square triangles first for the 2 at a time. But when you are prepping it, especially if you have 15 fat quarters, you have more than what you need to make this quilt, which is good because you want to have a little wiggle room just in case you mess something up. But when you're pulling it and putting it together, you want to make sure that you have pairs because you need 4 matching half square triangles for each block. So in order to get that, you're going to need 2 of your background and 2 matching squares of your fat quarter. So if I had like one of these only, that would not be enough to make a whole quilt. So you just want to make sure you have even numbers of these when you're putting them together, and that will give you enough when you are putting everything together in the end. So just make sure you have even squares of your prints and not an odd number, or you're gonna look at it and be like, why don't I have enough? And that's why. So just grab even numbers, maybe make your first block as a set so that you can like get it down, and then go back and figure out, okay, I need even numbers of all of my fabrics that I'm going to use so that I have enough to have the correct amount in the end. So hopefully that makes sense. It is explained very clearly in the pattern to go along with that, and you can grab that on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. I suggest that you kind of follow along with it as you're watching this. So the first thing you want to do is mark a line going from corner to corner. And the 6.5 inch square is not quite long enough to do that, so you're going to want to choose a larger ruler. I use my 9.5 inch square, but a 6 by 24 inch ruler would work as well. But what you're going to want to do is line it up both at the top and the bottom. And then this is the key. You want to make sure that you're angling your friction gel pen in so that the tip of the pen is in contact with the ruler. If you put it to the side, then you're not going to be quite in the center, and especially if you have it angled this way, then you're going to have a problem because it's definitely not going to be in the center. When we sew these, the reason why I like to do 2 at a time is because this bias is stretchy, more so than we have the straight of grain. And if I were to cut this apart first and into 2 triangles and then sew it together, I would be more likely to accidentally stretch out the seam, and then it makes it hard to get a good triangle, half square triangle that fits together when this is all warped, because it ends up being like a frowny face or a smiley face, depending on how you're feeling in that moment. And the seam just gets curved as it gets stretched out rather than staying nice and straight. But when you sew it first, when this is together, then it doesn't stretch as much because it has something next to it to kind of hold it together. So what we're going to do is we're just going to layer these guys right sides together. And I don't pin these because I have probably made a gajillion of these at this point in my sewing life. But I'm going to show you where you would want to pin if you're new to this technique and you want to do that extra step. So when you pin, you want to make sure you're going to pin where you're going to sew. So normally we're going to sew on the edge of the fabric at a 1/4 inch seam to keep everything together. But to do the 2 at a time half square triangles, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend like the center line is the edge of our fabric, because eventually we're going to cut this apart to make 2 half square triangles. So we're going to set our sewing machine up to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to sew completely down one side, and then we're going to flip everything around and sew completely down the other side. So I've seen people pin out here before, and that's not very helpful to you because you're not sewing out here, you're going to be sewing up and down this line. So these points are the points where it's most important to pin, because that's what you want to not move. So what I do is I get it started up top like that, just going straight across where I'm going to be sewing. And then I'm going to do the same thing down at the bottom here so that I can keep my points aligned and keep everything together for where I need it to be. And that way I'm able to sew right down here, and I don't have to worry about maybe it started out good up here, but then we got way off. Because if you get way off here, then you're not going to be able to get your seam going out to the corner, and then you're going to have a hard time getting a square block in the end because you didn't start off with your seam in the correct spot. So that's where you want to pin if you're going to. The other option you can do, and this is what I do, is I have, all of my stuff just stacked up, or I'll have a stack of my background fabrics that I marked while I was sitting and watching TV or a movie or something, and then I will just grab it and put it on top of my fabric as I'm going, and then I can have a whole stack on this side of my fat 1/4 squares. So that's what I do. I don't pin anymore, but if you're a newbie, pinning might be a good idea, at least for the first couple until you get the hang of it. So you're going to want to look at your sewing machine manual, and if you need to know how to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam, we have a whole video on it in our Triangle Masterclass that you can watch for free. But what I do is I set my sewing machine up to sew a 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm able to just move my needle one position to the right, and I'm sewing at a 6.0 instead of a 5.5 on my machine. And so it gets just a little tinier, and that way I've got a little bit extra wiggle room when I cut stuff apart later, because I would rather have a little bit more to cut off than have a half square triangle that's not large enough, because then you have to fudge a lot of stuff that you don't want to have to fudge. So what I'm going to do here next is I'm going to line up my presser foot so that the edge of it is on that pink line that I marked. And I use a friction gel pen for that. It goes away with heat. You can use a mechanical pencil though if you want. You want a really sharp point. And because this is going to be inside the seam, no one's ever going to see it, so that is an okay option. I would not use regular ink pen or Sharpie. So mechanical pencil's fine, friction gel pen is fine. All right, so I've got everything underneath there so I can remove my pin, and I'm going to get started sewing. And when you do this, like you can see, I have no hands here, like mono hands, and it is pulling it along. Everything is going just fine. So when I have my hand on here, it is literally just to help make sure that this line stays in contact with the edge of that presser foot. You do not want to pull on this or push on this. You want to let your feed dogs do their job and pull everything along. Now when you get down here, we're pretty close to that point, so now is an okay time to take that pin out, and then I just put my finger to the side, and that helps me stay in line as I make my way down. Now I'm going to do the next one. Now what I do is I typically am grabbing these from the side, and I only line up my top point to get started. And what I do is I just slide it right up next to it. So I've got a little gap in between, because you want to be able to snip these apart later. Now, once I've got a few on there, and we are talking a few, I maybe stitched 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to grab the ends, and I'm going to make sure that my points are lined up, and I'm just going to pinch those together, and I'm going to let my sewing machine take it. And once I've hit the point where I can lay that point on the sewing machine, I just put my finger on top of that to hold it in place. Might switch hands here. And we can see that we've gotten here, my points are still right on top of each other, which is exactly what I need. So I'm going to move my hand to the side to help keep those where they need to be, and sew all the way to the edge. Now you can chain piece this way until you've got your entire stack sewn together. But again, for the first one, maybe just do enough for one block as the instructions show you in the pattern, and then go back later. So once I've gotten done with my chain piece, I can lift my needle up and I can pull my entire stack to the side. When I was doing this, I was doing about 30 at a time, and it worked out really well for me because then I didn't have a giant pile in the back, because it can get to be a little much. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing just before the end here. And now I've got it lined up, still the edge of that presser foot with that pink line. And then I'm just going to start sewing. This part does go faster because you don't have to do as much aligning. And again, don't pull on anything. That's what's going to give you that curved seam that we don't want. All right, so I've sewed all the way off my first one. You can see this one is moving around quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift it up and get it unlined so that everything is together. And I'll hold my finger here just to get it off to a good start, and then we'll continue on. Now when you get all the way to the end, you're going to have 2 little bits that are connecting it. You're just going to snip those, and just be careful not to cut your fabric, that you're only cutting the line. Now if you have not done this method before, now is a really good time to do a quality checkpoint. You can see my seam line here and here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my ruler down on top of that, and I can see that my second seam is just inside that 1/2 inch mark, which is perfect. It either needs to be right on the 1/2 inch mark or just a little bit below when you have the edge of your ruler lined up with the first seam line, because that gives you that scant 1/4 inch seam or a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So that way when you cut it apart, you have the math correct. So that way you're able to trim it down and get the right size triangle to figure out at the end. Now, if you do this and your seams are more than 1/2 inch apart, then you need to rip it out and start again, because your triangles are going to be too small. The geometry is not going to work with that. So just double check this. Again, do one set of block first, and then move on once you know you've got it down. So now I'm going to take that ruler and I'm going to line it up on my pink line that I marked, and I am going to cut straight down it. Now it doesn't matter if you are right on top of this line, because we already have the accuracy from sewing a scant 1/4 inch seam on both sides of it, but you don't want to have a seam that's too skinny. So anything smaller than 1/8 of an inch is too skinny, and it can pop open with use, or even just when you put it on the long arm. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. And now we've got a 2-for-1 1/2 square triangle, and we are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my other one down the middle, and then we're going to move on to pressing. So I always press my 1/2 square triangles open. It makes a really big difference in both your finished size, because you're not taking up a little bit of the fabric as you flip it to the dark side. And also it makes it really great for getting really precise points when you sew everything together, and you're able to quilt right into those points when you quilt it later. So what I'm doing is I'm just opening that seam and kind of finger pressing it open. I usually keep about 3 fingers down on that seam ahead of the iron. So I want to go slow so you don't burn yourself. And once I press one entire side from the wrong side, then I also press it from the right side, just to get it super nice and flat. There is one thing you want to be careful of when you are pressing these, and that's to make sure that you are not tugging at all on this. You just want it to be nice and flat, as if you tug, it can also make this seam curved, and then you've got a little smiley face or a frowny face, which again makes it hard to get an accurate size half square triangle in the end. All right, so now we're going to trim this to size. When I make my half square triangles and write the pattern instructions for it, I technically give you an extra 1/8 of an inch to work with. So that gives you a little bit of play. You're going to want to make sure you trim them down so they're all the right size and also super square. And it also removes these dog ears, which will help reduce the bulk on the inside of the quilt and just make everything a lot easier to work with. I did one very large quilt as an early quilter where I skipped this step because I figured it would take a long time and was not worth it. And I very much regretted that decision when I was putting everything together, because it would have been much easier if everything would have just been the same size to start with. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to take our 6.5 inch ruler and we're going to line this up. And one of the most important parts to look at is your 45-degree line. This should be going straight down that seam. This is an extreme example, but if I were to cut this with the 45-degree line coming way out here, then that point is never going to go into the corner because it wasn't there to start with. So even if it's off just a little bit, this is going to be hard to work with. So that is step number one, get that 45-degree line where it needs to be. From there, I want to make sure I've got a little bit hanging off the edges here, and we're going to trim to 4.5 for this one. So I've got a little sliver hanging off beyond that as well. Now what I do is I put my whole palm down on the ruler and I have my pinky off to the side. That kind of helps stabilize everything and keep it from shifting. You also kind of want to make sure you have a fairly sharp rotary cutter for this step, because if you have a dull one, it can kind of push the fabric out of the way and cause problems. So I've trimmed now along the side and top, so that's nice and neat. And I'm going to flip this around. So now my cut edges are here and here. So for this one, I'm going to line up still that 45-degree going straight up that seam. Again, we do not want to get off here. We want to be right on there. And now since I've already trimmed these edges, they are exactly on that 4.5. Still going to put my hand down with that palm down and pinky to the side and trim along the side and the top. Now, if you are a lefty, this is all going to be reversed. You're going to be working from this end. So you can see I have not taken that much off. But when you line it up next to one that I've not trimmed at, you can see a marked size difference. And this one is nice and neat and square. This one, not so much. We're kind of are looking a little like crooked on the side there. And it's not because I wasn't careful when I cut, because I definitely was. It's just this preps it really well for putting your block together. And this one, you kind of just are going to cross your fingers and hope for the best. And the best is probably not going to happen. So don't skip this step. Make sure you take the time to trim everything down. So this is why it was important to start with 2 backgrounds and 2 matching fat quarter squares. Because for each one background and 1 fat quarter square, you're going to get 2 half square triangles. But we need 4 half square triangles in order to make 1 block. So as long as you're working in pairs, you're fine. It'll be good. Now, again, you can batch all of this and do all of it at one time, as long as you make sure before you get started that you have even amounts of your fat quarter squares. So just make sure you don't have an odd number in your stack, and you'll have plenty to make it go together correctly in the end. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start sewing this together. We're going to be done with our scant 1/4 inch seam. We're going to do a regular 1/4 inch seam for this. And we are just going to sew our right sides together, first with horizontal rows. Now, when we look at this, we don't actually have any points to match just yet, because our half square triangle is meeting up here where it's just a solid 90-degree angle, and same with down here, our 45-degree angle is meeting a 90-degree angle, which means when we put this right sides together, all we have to do is make sure that our points line up like it was a regular square, and we can sew it like any normal 4 patch at this point. Again, if you want to pin, you can. What I do is I make sure that my top 2 corners are lined up before I put it underneath that presser foot. I'll sew a couple of stitches, and then I will line up my bottom 2 corners, and I will just put my finger on top of that to hold them together. Again, you don't want to be pulling on anything. You just want to let your hand go up along with those feed dogs. And when you get to the point where you can't hold that anymore, I move my hand off to the side and let it go to maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. Now, this is the point where I had my husband helping. We've had a lot of things like get in the way of getting this quilt done with, sick kids and sick video editors. So I had to take on some of those duties last week, and just, being right before Christmas, there's lots happening. So what I do here, and I just explained this to him last night, so I know what all the tips and tricks are that you might mess up if you've never done this before, because this was just what we went over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by opening this up. And he had a hard time like getting this part open. So if you kind of start more in the center to open that up, that's great. The other thing you can do is you can go ahead and press that open and just kind of work from the center out. Again, you want to make sure you're not stretching, but that you're just kind of flattening that out. But once you do that, you're going to take the tip of your iron and you're going to guide it straight up. Now right here, this angle is going in the direction of the iron, so you don't have to worry about accidentally pressing this in the wrong direction. But once you hit here, your tip of your iron can hit it, or the edge here can hit it, and then it can get pushed the other way. So once you get to this point and you're ready to go over that seam, you want to lift your iron up. This is exaggerated, you don't have to go up that high, but then you just want to set it back down. And you're not pressing hard, like you're not like giving yourself carpal tunnel pushing down on this. The weight of the iron is enough and the heat of the iron is enough to get that nice and flat. Now, once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and flip that over and then also press from this side to get it nice and flat. But if you ever see like a little wiggle back here, it means you have a pleat. You want this to look nice and straight. Now this threw them off too. So the different halves look different because they're mirror images of each other. So on this side, the angle is going to be going off to the other direction. But you still, once you get to this seam where it's crossing, that's where you want to lift it up, because you don't want to accidentally hit this seam with the iron or the end of it and make it flip over the wrong way. All right, so at this point, you should have these points going right to the corner of the block, but right now our points are going to be ending about 1/4 inch away from the edge. That's supposed to be that way. If it looks like this, you've done everything correct, because this is going to get eaten up in our seam allowance, and it will allow these points to match perfectly once we sew this seam together. So I'm going to show you my double pinning method for doing this. Again, we have a whole video tutorial just on this method and putting blocks together in our Triangle Masterclass if you need more in-depth look at it. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip everything right sides together. And this is one of the reasons why I love pressing my seams open, because right now I can see exactly where these seams come together and that this is going to be the point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my pin in right at the tip of this little triangle, because I want it to be just at the top of this fat quarter bit here, because that is where we want to sew to the side of, on the seam side of this, in order to have our points match perfectly when it's all done. So now I'm going to find the same spot on here, and we're going to be going in from the right side on this one. But again, we're going to go just above where this ends, right in that seam allowance. So this is a great example of, right now, I've got that pin going straight up and down, so I know for a fact that those points are right on top of each other and they're going to look good when we get everything together. But if we look at this side here, you can see that my bottom one is sticking out a little bit further. Don't worry about that, because I would rather have it be off the teensiest bit on the inside but have my point look perfect than have it be perfect on the inside where nobody is ever going to see and have my point be not where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to choose to focus on the pretty side. So now at this point, I don't pin with this one. I keep it pinched between my thumb and forefinger and going straight up and down. If I were to pin with this, the top one would rock forward and the bottom one would rock back, and my points would no longer be on top of each other. So you want to be careful as you do this, but you want to put your pin in the seam allowance on the right side, and you want to pin across where that is. So just try not to poke yourself. And you can see that I've got that pin going straight in, and this is still going straight through the fabric. So now I can remove this because I've got everything pinned together, and I know that my points are right on top of each other. I'm going to do one more thing here because I have points matching here. So I want to make sure, and this is pretty easy to do for this block because it's really easy to tell where that seam is. You want to just line those seams right on top of each other. And again, I'm going to pin in the right side of that seam allowance. Now I see people pin in all kinds of interesting places. I'm not going to call them wrong, but I don't agree with any of them. So I'll see people pin this way or across this way. And the biggest thing is I want to be able to just pull that pin out as I'm sewing. And then also, just like before, we want to pin where it matters. So if you have a pin coming in like way down here, that's not going to be helpful because all of this can move around and then your point doesn't look good. Or if I come in and I start my pin way inside here, that also is not going to work because you're not pinning where it matters. That blue pin is way too far outside of your seam allowance and it's not going to work. So you want to make sure that you're pinning like right where you're going to be sewing in order for it to work. And now when I sew this, like 99% of the time, this point here is right a 1/4 inch away. But sometimes it's not exactly a 1/4 inch away. So where I'm aiming for that needle to be is right at the tip of this tiny white triangle, because then when we open this up, these points are going to be just kissing each other right in the center of your quilt block, and it's going to look fabulous. So if you need to casually, slowly change that 1/4 inch seam slightly in order to make sure you hit right here, go ahead and do it. It will not compromise the end quality of your block. It will be fine and it will look fantastic. All right, so what I do is I get everything under the block or under my presser foot, and then I'm going to stitch the first couple so that I've got my needle down in the first half of that seam allowance, because whenever your needle is down in your seam allowance, it kind of acts like a pin. So that's when you can remove the pin that's already in there because you already have got that stitched down and good to go. So I'm working with that 1/4 inch stitch, and you can see this is the part where it was not quite perfect on the edges, but I'm just going to sew that 1/4 inch stitch, and now I'm slowing down as I come to that center because I want to make sure that I sew just to the right of that point so that I'm in the seam allowance. And I did not pull the pin until I had my needle down in the first half of that seam allowance. In fact, I'm kind of like right in the middle of that seam. I always wait until the last possible second because then I know everything is going to stay put and the time I spent pinning is going to be worth it. So now I've got my edges lined up on top of each other down here, and I'm going to go ahead and sew the rest of the way. Let's just take one more look of where that seam is. You can see that I stitched right over that pink line that I made. So that is going just to the right of where this point is, and it's right on the tip of where this little dog ear bit is. And that way when we open it up, our point should be right on. I am just a smidgen off here, but I will take that. I'm going to call that good. I'm happy with that result. I'm going to get this pressed open and then we are good to go. All right, so my husband, who has no sewing experience beyond cutting all of your orders, he pressed all these open for me last night so that I could get a little bit further on the quilt. What I like to do is start on the pointy end. I feel like that is easier to get that open to start with and then go down. So because we have a lot of seams here, we want to make sure we're lifting and pressing. Again, just like before, we have our seams going in the same direction as the iron, so we are able to just slide it along down there. But when we come to the center seam, I should have been pressing my fingers down to kind of help open that up. You want to really give it a good press in that center with your thumb, and then you're going to lift that up. Now we have a lot going on here, so the rest of the block we want to lift and press to get over there. That way we are not getting rid of any of the good work we've done with pressing the block to this point. Now I do one final step here before I do my final press from the front. Right now I've got a lot of volume where this seam is, and I don't want that. And by the way, can we talk about how fabulous this is? Like, this is really coming together fantastic. And this one's going right to the center. This one's off a smidge, but that is good enough for me. Once I get it all quilted and it's washed and dried, you won't ever notice that. So I would not redo this. if you had one that was really bad, you only have to unpick about an inch on either side, repin that center, and then try again. So you don't have to redo this whole thing, just a little bit on either side. So I do not like to put water in my iron because I feel like whenever I do that, it eventually gets gross and spits stuff out on my white fabric. So what I do instead is I have this Nifty Notion spray mister, and you can get those on our website, and it turns the water into a fine aerosol mist. So that way you can spritz your whole block. I kind of do a little circle swirly, and then I go straight down that center seam because that's where I really want to focus on. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go straight down that center. And this kind of gives you the same effect as steam in order to allow you to get a really flat block. Like you can see the difference here of how flat this bottom part is versus up top where I haven't hit it yet. But without worrying about gunking up your iron. So this is like my go-to method. So you can see that this is super flat. It's gorgeous, and my points are where they belong. Everything looks really good, and it did a great job of highlighting that fabric. So what you're seeing on our overhead camera is not the full repeat, but it is an example of what this is going to look like. We'll show the full repeat as a graphic, and it's also included in the pattern for scatter that you can get on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. So there is a method to the madness. You're going to repeat the direction that each arrow is going for the repeat. Now here's where it can get a little weird, and we will show you like the time lapse of me actually sewing this together and laying it all out. So the first thing I'm going to do when I do this at home is I'm going to lay everything out on my bed, and I'm going to commit to getting at least all my vertical rows together in one go. If you have a design wall or a spare bed where you can leave it out for longer, that works too. But take a photo of it so that way if you do have to put it away, you can recreate it later. So what you're going to do is you're going to arrange all your repeats out, and the biggest thing you want to pay attention to is that not all of the rows start at the same spot. So this is the top of this row, and then this is offset. So this one is going to start up. Once everything is assembled, we're going to slice off the top of these blocks, and that's going to get leveled out so that you do have a nice square top and bottom. But this is kind of what makes it the modern look, because we're able to create all this mishmash, and it's not all like perfectly, you know, symmetrical and laid out, and it has that sort of, you know, asymmetrical design situation going on, which makes it more modern. So what you want to do is just make sure you lay everything out, and once you have the amount of repeats laid out as you need for your size of quilt, again, that's going to be 2 for the lap, 3 for the twin, just vertically. And if you are doing a king, you're going to have 3 in one section, in one vertical half, and 3 in the other vertical half, so 6 total. So once you have that, then you're going to put everything into vertical rows. So if you are doing the twin like I'm doing, you're going to join all the repeats in one vertical row, go lay it back out, and then keep working your way down. And again, we'll do a time lapse of this so you can kind of see the process of me doing it at home, and it will just work out really well that way for you. But the biggest thing is to just follow the repeat pattern as you're laying it out, and then just sew into giant vertical rows and then join your vertical rows together. When you are putting this together, you want to make sure you're using that 2-pinning method I showed you when we joined our centers. Of course, my centers here this one looks absolutely completely fabulous as opposed to the one we did on camera. That's how it always goes. But you want to make sure you use that 2-pinning method when you are joining any of your triangle bits, so that way the point of this triangle meets up really nicely with the side of this arrow. When you have points like this, where you have a point meeting a background, just try to sew it with this end up, so that way you can sew to the right of where the point is, so you don't accidentally cut it off. And you are going to have a couple of places where your points kind of match up once you are putting things together. So again, use the 2-pinning method where it's needed, so that way all your points look absolutely fabulous. I really love the pressing open method because it really makes those points look absolutely fabulous. And then I'm going to be able to quilt right into the points when I get to that step next. And we'll have a quilting video on how to do this as well that we'll release later in the week. So you can stay tuned for that. Well, I hope you have enjoyed making scatter with me. It's definitely, the block is not hard. There's some time involved in trimming down all those half square triangles. I suggest you don't do it all in one go. Maybe do like a third of them and then sew a third of the blocks and keep repeating that process until you get through them all. But do take a photo of all your trimmings. They look really fun when you get the photo of the trimmings all done. And get everything together and then snap photos when you got your layout figured out, so that way you know everything is good to go. And also if anything's like standing out to you, like these oranges, these are going to be your pop blocks. So you do not want them to be all concentrated in one section because it's going to draw the eye to that one bit. You want to make sure that it is looking pretty good all around the quilt. So make sure you're paying attention to that as you lay everything out so it can look fabulous. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to join Stashin with Stephanie, then do that in one transaction. And then in the next one, you can get this pattern for free. And you can also get a 20% off discount on the quilt kit while supplies last and any additional fabrics from Belle Epoque or the Seeds fabric. So you can make this yourself. One real fun thing about this month's pattern, this doesn't always work out this way, but if you want to make the king size version, you just need to get 2 twin size kits because basically when you double up 2 twins, it's going to make you a king size quilt and you have exactly the amount of fabric you need. So that works out really well, and I highly suggest doing that if you really like this fabric and this pattern. It is a fun make. But as long as you do that on your second checkout after you sign up for Stashin with Stephanie, then their website will know you're a member. You'll get your automatic discounts for that free pattern and any of the other free patterns that you want to get from Stashin with Stephanie, and also any of the fabric or kits that you grab. If you sign up before the end of December, so December 31st, then you will get your first bundle shipped to you around the 22nd of January. If you sign up January 1st or later, you're looking at February 22nd. We explain that every single month, and every single month somebody misses that. So we just like to hammer it over your heads a little bit so that hopefully you guys know what the situation is from the start, so you have your expectations set and are just happy and excited to get your fabric. The other thing that I need to mention is that this is already all shipped out to our members. So if you join because you saw this video, this is not going to be the fabric that you get. You are going to get a different fabric for your first bundle. So you want to make sure that you get a kit for it, and you can work on that. That'll ship right away. You can work on that while you're waiting for that first bundle. So have fun, get a little something for you after you just shop for everybody else. And until next time, happy quilting.